Hi, I'm here to tell you a little bit about uh, why the United States entered World War I in 1917. World War I was a disastrous, destructive war. Some called it the war to end all wars because it was so took such a huge cost in terms of human lives. Um, some called it the Great War. But all recognize it as one of the most devastating wars of the 20th century for certain. The two things I want to do today with this brief mini lecture is to tell you a little bit about the outbreak of the war and why it happened, why it started in Europe to begin with, and then explain some reasons why the United States might have gotten involved in World War I when it did, 3 years or so after it began. The United States, or rather, let's talk about the powers or countries involved in World War I. They included, on the one hand, the Central Powers, on the other hand, the Allied Powers. Central Powers included Germany and Austria-Hungary, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It also included the Ottoman Empire in the area known as Turkey today. On the one hand, those are the Central Powers. And then there were the Allied powers, which included Great Britain, France, and for a while, Russia. Those are the three biggest, most important countries to join on the Allied side. Now, there's an important similarity between the three major Central Powers. All three of them, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, were more or less autocratic nations that is ruled for the most part by a monarch or an emperor or what you might call a dictator, an autocrat, in the case of the German Empire. On the other hand, the Allied powers, for the most part, except for Russia, in Europe at least, Great Britain and France in particular, and Belgium, were democratic powers. They were democracies. Now, during the first few years of World War I, the important thing to remember is that Woodrow Wilson, the president, the Democratic president at the time, maintained what had been up to this point a tradition in American foreign policy, which is to stay out of European affairs, stay out of European crises especially. Remember, that was George Washington's advice for the country when he gave his farewell address way back in the 1790s. He said, Europe is a mess. Europe is the old world. We are the new world. We should never get involved in any of the problems or crises of the old world, which are constant and many. We can trade with Europe, but we do not have to become entangled in their problems. And for 100+ years, the United States kind of maintained that stance of neutrality when it came to European affairs. Now, by the time we got involved in World War I, the United States had certainly become a regional and perhaps a world power, flexing its muscle in Latin America and in Asia, for example, as we've talked about, but staying out of European affairs for the most part. Woodrow Wilson said Americans must remain neutral in thought as well as deed. Some things to know about before 1970. Oh, let's forget that. As the years went by, and World War I continued in Europe, little by little, the United States began to be affected by it. The British, as you can see here, one of their strategies was to blockade Germany so that Germany could not trade with anybody else, and especially, of course, to prevent Germany from trading weapons, from receiving weapons from other countries, including the United States. Germany, for its part, did the same thing, patrolling the Atlantic Ocean to try and prevent trade with Britain. As a result, of course, that meant that the United States got caught in the middle. The United States wanted to remain neutral and trade with both countries. Germany and Britain made it hard to do that. Skip that. But the president and the Democrats continued to say, that the United States would remain isolated, would remain neutral in this war. And in 1916, Woodrow Wilson campaigned for a second term in office as president, and his main slogan was, "He kept us out of the war." For 2 years now, the war had been going on, and Wilson had kept us out of it. And he said, "There will be peace with honor," meaning we will stay out of this, we will remain honorable, and at peace with these countries. We won't get involved, he said, over and over again. He won the election in 1916, and in 1917, the United States officially went to war in Europe and joined World War I on the side of the Allied powers, Great Britain and France in particular. Now, why in the world did that happen? What caused the United States to intervene in World War I? What changed between 1914 and 1917 to lead America into the war? That's the next big question. There are perhaps 5 causes that historians have pointed to, some prioritizing or emphasizing one over others. Those 5 causes are listed here. I'll give you a second to read them, and then I'll describe each of them. You can pause if you wish to make sure you have you preview these 5 causes. The first cause is German provocation. That is, the Germans did something to make us angry, and that's why we got into the war. Now, many historians have taken that approach, and there's some evidence that they might use to support that. For example, Germany, in its effort to prevent the United States from trading with Great Britain, over the years ramped up its effort to attack or contain ships in the Atlantic that were approaching Great Britain. One of the new weapons that Germany was using was the U-boat, Unterseeboot in German, which was basically an early version of the submarine. Using weapons fired from submarines, the German Navy destroyed a number of ships to enforce its blockade of Great Britain. One of those ships included Americans. The Lusitania, famously, was sunk in 1915 by German submarines, killing over 1,000 people off of the coast of Great Britain. It was a passenger ship, so many were appalled by it. It did, however, have munitions or weapons in its store, and the Germans sank it, believing that it did, killing all the people on board. Now, it would still be another 2 years before the United States went to war with Germany. So the sinking of the Lusitania is certainly something that can be pointed to as a potential reason for America's joining the war, but it can't explain why. It can't be explained, or it can't be used as a short-term reason, because it did take a couple of years before the U.S. joined the war. So are there any other factors that may have contributed to the war? Well, there's another one. Some point to Germans provoking the U.S. in a different way. In 1917, Germany secretly sent a telegram to Mexico and said to the Mexican government in this telegram that if Germany were to join or to get into a war with the United States, Mexico was asked to join on the side of Germany, to become an ally of Germany, and attack the United States from the south. And Germany said that if they did so, Germany would ensure that all of the territories that Mexico lost in the U.S.-Mexico War way back in the 1850s would be recovered by Mexico with the help of Germany. Now, this telegram was made public. It was revealed in the American press, and it led to huge outrage on the part of many Americans who believed that Germany was conspiring with Mexico to take away land that now belonged to the United States. There's another potential reason why Americans were becoming more and more inclined to join the war. Another reason was an idealistic reason, that is, in support of the ideology of democracy. This is Wilson's war message to Congress in April of 1917, and it might provide a hint as to why the U.S. went to war. According to Woodrow Wilson, and if you can read this for yourself, but the key phrase here is he said that the world must be made safe for democracy. Remember that Germany, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire were all autocracies, meaning they didn't have any democracy in those countries. Britain, on the other hand, was one of the world's great democracies. The United States chose to join Britain in the war, and Wilson said that we needed to do that in order to protect Great Britain and the democratic way of life from the threat of Germany and its allies in the Central Powers. So for Wilson, at least in this speech and in many others he gave, the best reason for the U.S. to go to war was to protect the democracies that were being threatened in Europe, to continue our mission to spread democracy around the world. There's another potential reason, and that's money. This is a graph that shows you the imports and exports and how much they were valued between 1914 and 1919. As you can see, between 1914 and 1919, the United States enjoyed a big increase in exports. The reason, of course, was as Europe was involved in the war, the United States saw an opportunity, American businesses saw an opportunity to replace a lot of the lost manufacturing and agricultural production that Europe was not able to do anymore because they were too busy shooting each other. This made America even more entangled economically in Europe in a way that some historians and people at the time said kind of made America more and more inclined to protecting its economic interests abroad and continuing that trade by joining the war. There's another graph that kind of shows you the huge disparity between the trade with Europe, between Britain, the U.S. and Britain and France on the one hand, and the U.S. and Germany. This graph shows you that by 1917, Americans were trading much more with Britain and France than they were with Germany. One of the reasons is because the British were doing a really good job of blockading the Germans. The point is that the more Americans got embroiled with or entangled with the economies of Britain and France, some observers said the more Americans were willing and eager, especially American leaders were willing and eager to fight on the side of Britain and France. It's all about protecting the money, they argued, or some argued. Many historians have agreed. Bank loans is another picture that supports this explanation. Britain and France enjoyed a great deal of credit extended to them by the United States banks. And some said that, well, the more American banks loaned money to Britain and France so that they can fight the war, the more it became important for the United States to make sure that they could pay that money back, thus causing many American leaders to lean toward war as well. So economic interests might be used to explain why the United States decided to go to war in 1917. George Norris certainly agrees. He was a senator in 1917 who was against the war, and he said that we are taking a step today that is fraught with untold danger. We're going into war upon the command of gold. We're going to run the risk of sacrificing millions of our countrymen's lives in order that other countrymen may coin their lifeblood into money. We are about to do the bidding of wealth's terrible mandate. By our act, this law declaring war, or this act of Congress declaring war, we will make millions of our countrymen suffer, and the consequences of it may well be that millions of our brethren must shed their lifeblood. Millions of broken-hearted women must weep, millions of children must suffer with cold, and millions of babes must die from hunger, and all because we want to preserve the commercial right of American citizens to deliver munitions of war to belligerent nations. Meaning, all we want to do is continue to trade with Britain and France, especially weapons, so that American businesses can make a lot of money. Another possible reason for America's entry into World War I was that we didn't like the Germans. Remember that immigration was a big problem at this time for a lot of nativists, people who were native-born Americans who weren't into immigration. There were a lot of Germans living in this country. And there was a lot of anti-German propaganda. These are two examples. This is a German soldier stabbing an angel baby through the chest. And here is a German, an ape that's supposed to symbolize a German soldier crossing over the Atlantic to take away American women. And, anyway, yeah, that's a thing. A lot of people didn't like Germans. There was a lot of kind of propaganda to gin up hatred of Germans. And some argue that that was a reason why America was inclined to go to war, or many Americans were. And then there's militarism. Don't forget that the United States had been building up a navy, a pretty massive navy, throughout these years of early American imperialism, especially after the Spanish-American War in 1898. And during Woodrow Wilson's first term in office, or the president's first term in office, Congress and the president passed a law that authorized spending more and more money on the military in order to prepare for the eventuality of going to war, just in case, they said. Some argue that once you start building up a military, there's no turning back. Once you start making the military bigger and bigger, there's more and more pressure to use the military for some reason or another. A socialist, American radical, Emma Goldman, made this argument in 1915 when she said that preparedness, this policy on the part of Wilson and the Democrats in Congress to prepare for war by building up the military, was going to lead us into the war. She says that you cannot build up a standing army and then throw it back into a box like tin soldiers. And then you can read the rest of her quote there, but the gist of it is that America created a big army and navy, and it was inevitable that we were going to have to use it eventually, because that's what happens when you create a big army and a navy. So, 5 potential reasons that led us to war. Like I said, some historians have, prefer one or the other. Others have emphasized, some other ones. Think about it for a few seconds. Which of these 5 to you seems to be the more convincing cause? Thank you.